Welcome to Disruptor in Chief, a show about the ongoing revolution in higher education. Let's hear from the main man leading the charge at Maryville University. Here's your host, Dr. Mark Lombardi.
Hello, I'm Dr. Mark Lombardi, and this is another episode of Disruptor in Chief. Welcome and glad to have you. You know, at a university, you have a Board of Trustees. Maryville's no different. We have 25 to 30 dedicated people, and their primary job is to hire and fire the president of the university. And so this is a little different. I'm going to interview two of my bosses. So if at the end of this podcast I ask the wrong questions or whatever, and someone else is doing this podcast in a few weeks, you'll know why. But thrilled to be able to welcome first the chairman of the board, Ed Ryan, who's been with Maryville for a number of years and has done a great job as chairman the last few years, of course, and Chris Chadwick, who's vice chair of the Board of Trustees. And together, the two of them are really the power within the power of the Board of Trustees, as they say. But welcome. Glad to have you with us. Thrilled to have you. The one thing we won't do is an assessment of the president's performance, but every other topic is open. But Ed, why don't we start off? Give people a sense of your background, where you're from, your business background, and those kinds of things.
Okay. Well, welcome. It's great to be here, Mark. I'm from Kansas City, went to the University of Kansas, married, my wife Laura, 3 kids, 4 grandkids. I'm a Maryville. My son went to Maryville, had a great experience here. And most of my experience in my life has been in private equity. We buy businesses and hopefully make them better. And we've probably bought 30 businesses. Everything from animal nutrition for people that have hobby farms, they want to take care of their horses and chickens and rabbits and you name it, type of goats, you name it, kind of animals. Companies that made lights and sirens for police cars, companies that made products for parts for people to manufacture, merchandising solutions. Currently, we have 3 businesses that we're involved with. One's an airline, fractional airline. You probably heard of NetJets. It's a company like that called Executive Airshare. We have a business that's a marketing company. It's healthcare focused, and it's making a big pivot into AI called Brado. And we have a skincare company that's micro brands that's called New World Natural Brands. And the rest of the activities is a family office. We invest in things, and people ask me what I do. I'm really in the jockey business. If we can find better jockeys to get on these horses, if we can find better management teams to get involved with these businesses, they tend to do better.
Well, opportunities where you find it, I guess.
Right.
And I think, is it safe to say private equity is something that has really emerged in the last 20, 30, 40 years prior? I mean, you didn't hear people using that term back when we were kids and our dads and moms were working and so forth.
We got in it at the really perfect time. It would be much harder to do today because it's a much more efficient market. There's really big players in the private equity, and they're very efficient. They raise funds and for all kinds of different focuses. So it would be harder to do today than it used to be. And we've always bought smaller things that were $30 to $100 million in revenue. And but today there's a market that serves that. So I would say private equity really got going in the last 35, 40 years and is in a very efficient business model now.
Great. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Chris, how about yourself?
Well, my background's a lot different than Ed's, but from a business perspective, I'd guess probably 80-90% of what we focus on is identical. I spent 34 years with first McDonnell Douglas here in St. Louis, and then Boeing Company when they were acquired on the defense side.
Mm-hmm.
So I had the opportunity to travel.
You need to emphasize that these days, right?
Very important. Boeing's a great company. Worldwide, we had probably 55,000 employees. I've been to 47 countries during my time with Boeing. And it was a fascinating learning curve. I had an engineering degree and then an MBA from Maryville. And so that combination allowed me early in my career to be successful, and the MBA really allowed me to reach heights that I never thought I'd reach. I've got 2 daughters who also graduated from Maryville, one 2 years ago. They love it. They're both doing very well. And I think something I'm very proud of from my background is I've been involved in several national non-for-profit educational boards that really have been focused on how do we lift up inner city students, K through 12th grade, and give them that opportunity, that springboard to be part of this great country called America.
Well, that kind of leads into this idea of the role of a trustee, whether it's at Maryville or other institutions. Obviously, you've been both very heavily involved as trustees in Maryville. So why don't you talk a little bit from both your perspectives? What is that role, and what do you see as the sort of the driver or the passion that you bring to the table as trustees?
Sure. I think, number one, it's hiring and firing the president. And Ed and I will be talking about that very soon. But more seriously, it truly is about being an active part of how Maryville has really accelerated into the 21st century before other universities. And it's focused not on just educating students to learn, but educating students to learn and prosper in life beyond the 4 walls of Maryville University. And so a typical day is focused on staying abreast of where Maryville is going and why, and then bringing to bear my knowledge and the knowledge of the other board members to try to take it to that next level in whatever way we can.
Yeah, I would agree with that completely. The only thing I would add is the board has a role of governance to make sure the school's doing what it's supposed to be doing, and it is. There's no issue with that at all. And the board gets involved with the strategic direction. Really, Mark and his team set it, but we get involved with that and review it and feel comfortable with it. And then I think we help, to some extent, the administrative team, execute those plans and that strategic focus.
So do you think that being a trustee of, in this case, obviously at Maryville University, and you also, both of you have experience with it, an alum, and 2 of your daughters and your son, Eddie, having been a student here, how does that help you understand a little bit about the university from their perspective, having children who went through it and got an education and so forth? What are the things that jump out at you? And it doesn't, but like, are there 2 or 3 things that jump out and say, wow, I learned something about the institution I didn't know through that experience?
Well, when my son's been graduated for some period of time, he's 39. The Maryville he graduated from is nothing like the Maryville today. And I was very impressed with the Maryville then. I'm incredibly impressed with it now. And so, yeah, we would learn things from what Eddie's perspective was on Maryville. But generally, my experience with Maryville, I learn a lot more than I get a lot more than I give, because it's a really fascinating experience to be here, because I come away from each meeting and each encounter learning something I didn't know before.
Yeah, and I'd say the 2 things that stand out to me is, and a lot of it's compared to when I went to college many years ago. Mm-hmm. One is Maryville creates an environment that students not only learn, but they're put in, I'd say, uncomfortable scenarios. So I could go, when I was going to school, I could sit in the back of the class, do my thing. If I'd had a cell phone back then, I'd have been on it. But today, with active learning, the students are called to work together, to learn together, to respect each other, and you take that learning then to a higher level. That never existed when I went to school, and it really is the first step in life after you graduate.
Yeah, that's what we call the active learning ecosystem, where instead of passively gathering information and pushing it back out, you really have to be actively engaged in that process. Help people understand, from your perspective, what is it like being a trustee at Maryville or any institution in terms of, that kind of role? I mean, what are you asked to do? How do you find the interactions with other trustees? I mean, what is that like? And as chair, Ed, obviously, and as vice chair, Chris, you're also working with the other trustees and sort of managing their perspectives and egos and all kinds of different things.
Well, to start with, there isn't a lot of managing going on because everyone's pulling the ship in the same direction. It's a very cohesive group in that regard. But the way a board is set up, there's various committees. We have a finance committee, education committee, all kinds of different committees. And there's chairs of each one of those committees, and they work with your team. And there's reporting that's done on how things are going from like enrollment to various initiatives at the school that we oversee. And then there's strategic things and directives that initiatives that are being worked on that we get updated on, and then we give input on. And from a hours per week, the people, Chris and I and some of the other key people are spending quite a few hours a week. Some of the other board members not as much, but they're all really engaged and really involved, and their comments and input is usually right on target.
Yeah, and it's an unpaid job, so you have to have a passion and a belief in the institution you're supporting, and everyone on the Board of Trustees does for Maryville, and as Ed said, for different reasons. And then what brings everyone together, and we do have an active role in it, but it's the strategic focus of where you and your team are trying to take Maryville. And I remember there's been a number of iterations, but when you created that, it's not just where are we going and why, but what's the cultural underpinnings that have to exist to make it a success and to bring everyone together. And I think that in itself brings the board together. And you see that in our board meetings where there's a lot of interaction. Sure, there's a chair and there's a vice chair, but everyone treats each other as equals. And I think that's taken the Maryville board to the next level.
Well, I got to disagree with that on one point. It's really not unpaid because both these gentlemen take my money from me on the golf course every time we go out there. So there is some kind of return on that investment, small though it may be. If I said to you, what is one thing about Maryville that you've learned that sticks out for you, that really defines it for you, what would it be? Ed, I'll start with you.
Well, there's so many, but the great thing about Maryville, and this is from you, you've taught us this, is that we can really take any student. We can take a student and get them an outsized outcome. And that's with all the testing we do to learn the students' learning style, so the coach works with the teachers to make sure they're being taught to that learning style, to the active learning learning system we talked about to get people comfortable engaging and working. And the result of that is 87% of our kids go on to get a job in their field or go to grad school. That's an unheard of number. And our kids are outboarding some kids from really prestigious schools. They didn't necessarily come in with the horsepower maybe some other students did, but they exited with those skills and with that horsepower.
Yeah, I would echo that. The student focus of Maryville, and when a lot of people think of student focus, they only think of the day-to-day education, the active learning system, but it's really more than that. Because of the strategic focus, as you look back at when COVID hit, Maryville didn't miss a beat because they had been looking forward, and they had spent a lot of time in the online environment. And so it was, wouldn't call it seamless, but it was certainly more seamless than a lot of universities in terms of we're looking out for the student in all regards. Mm-hmm. And I would say if you look back, it was a resounding success at how Maryville did that.
Well, and it's interesting when you talk about that and in the context of the conversations that we have at the board level, obviously, and we have internally, think of it, it's pretty easy to conceive. If you think about all the students who are going through high school in America today, there's a small percentage that are quote-unquote straight A and a small percentage who are flunking out. And the vast majority of students are in that great middle. And middle not in a pejorative sense, they simply are in that space. And those are the students, those are the young people that built this country, that are going to be the doctors, the nurses, the lawyers, the policemen and women, the firefighter. They are going to form the backbone of communities, not just here in St. Louis, but around the world. And they all have skills and abilities, sometimes untapped. And so one of the things is, you hear the term in a number of these podcasts, we talk about the active learning ecosystem and learning design and learning theory, is tapping into those abilities, because everyone has them and everyone has skill sets, and sometimes they're totally unaware that what they have.
You had a presentation one time with Apple, came in, and they had all these charts of your brain activity, sleeping, playing sports, reading a book, and everything. And the lowest brain activity, if I remember this correctly, was listening to a lecture. And that's how we all learned in college. Okay?
That's right.
And some people aren't good at listening in a lecture. It doesn't mean they don't know how to learn and they can't succeed.
Yeah. Well, years ago I taught, and back in the last century. And I remember, and now, through the internet, these students that you had 30, 40 years ago can reach out and contact you. And I've had a few of them contact me. And they're hugely successful, whatever. And almost all of them were sitting in the back half asleep, right? Or got a D on the test because they were bored with my lecture or whatever. And now they're doing wonderful things. And it helps you realize that that's not the only way. In fact, in many ways, it's not a good way of reaching people and energizing them. And being actively engaged in the learning is, for sure. You've touched on a few things about what Maryville's doing. I'm going to put you on the spot. What's one thing going into being a trustee you had no idea about higher education that you learned about? You learned something you had Ed mentioned about learning things. It could be something small, it could be something kind of funny, it could be whatever, but what's one thing that surprised the heck out of you about higher ed coming in as a trustee?
I would say, and there are many, but how forward-looking a university has to be successful for their students. Now, let me take that a step further. You and I had a conversation several years ago, and you said something that was very profound. It doesn't happen very often, but it did happen during that discussion. And what it
must have been from a fortune cookie or something.
It may have been. You said you've got to remember your parents and other individuals at their age were taught by teachers who grew up in the 1800s. So they were taught, lectured to, by what those individuals knew in the 1800s. So it's very hard for some people to evolve. Maryville's turned that on its side because it's looking so far forward and inviting new types of opportunities, degrees, certificates into the learning environment that when a student leaves, because of that progressive, proactive look, they're ready to learn for a long time and they're ready for life beyond Maryville.
Well, it's interesting you mention that because a lot of, and certainly you both are experts in this much more than I am, a lot of businesses are so focused on whatever the quarterly stock report is or the yearly. It's not that they don't look forward or plan ahead, but there's so much of a focus on that sometimes they do lose sight of that. Whereas universities, if they're doing their job, they have to look over the horizon. They have to really think in a much larger sweep of time if they're going to be able to strategically move forward. How about you, Ed? What?
I would think the thing that surprised me the most, and I'm not sure it's true at all universities, is the commitment you and Maryville have to change. And that change is just part of our DNA, and it happens constantly. And some people didn't embrace that, and they decided to go someplace else. But the people that are here now are really committed to that, and it's a really exciting place because it's so alive.
Well, and I can just speak from experience, and we've talked about this in other podcasts with other guests, that the biggest problem universities have is that resistance to change and a resistance to the fact that the world's a different place. Just a very simple fact that every kid carries a library in their pocket right now. When I was in school, the common phrase when we asked a question and the professor was frustrated with it was go to the library and answer your own question. And now a student can answer their own question with 2 clicks on their phone right there in class. And I might add, point out where the professor may be incorrect, right, about a certain fact or what have you.
Yeah, and your children and business associates can point out the mistakes you make all the time now very quickly.
I know how passionate both of you are and supportive of what Maryville's doing. Where do you see the future of higher ed? Now that you've been sort of immersed in higher ed for the last decade or more from a trustee perspective, where do you see the future of higher education? Do you see it, sort of continuing along the path it's been on? Do you see significant changes ahead? What kinds of things do you see, each of you individually?
I would see a lot of change. There's always going to be higher ed for the traditional student that wants to have the experience, get away from his parents or her parents and have that experience.
Go to a Kansas basketball
Go
game.
to Kansas basketball, go to a Maryville soccer game or whatever. And we're doing great with those traditional students. But that traditional student's going to get some of his curriculum online or her curriculum online. And I think what's changing is that they're going to have a relationship with their school for a lifetime, and because they're going to need to get reskilled, and we're very well positioned and to continue to reskill those students as they go through those needs.
I'd also say there's going to be, and it's already on this curve, but you go back in time, universities were pretty isolated. Then universities did a good job of finding opportunities, allowing students to find opportunities for a career. And now this immersion between university and learning and businesses, whatever. So it becomes very natural, and there's a natural pull for students who get a good education. And as Ed said, it's not, I was a C student, so it's not just the top of the class that will get pulled. It's all the students who have this passion to continue to learn and have learned a lot. And I think that's where universities will go if they want to be successful in the 21st century.
What's the line? I'll ruin it probably. A students teach B students who work for C students, something like that. I can't quite remember. But if you had to say, and let's drill down a little bit. People always talk about within the industry of higher ed, but certainly outside. Well, universities are not businesses, right? They're not for profit. How would you respond to that? I mean, you've been immersed in the finances of Maryville for many years. And you're both highly successful at business. What have you learned about the business of higher ed from your own perspectives, as opposed to this notion of, well, it's not for profit, so therefore it's not a business? What jumps out there from that financial standpoint?
Well, it is a business. Okay, it's not for profit, but it is a business. And what we do better than most of our peers, if not all of them, is we're really customer focused. We're student focused. There's a university closing per week right now.
Yes.
Maryville is fortunate not to be in that situation. And the reason we're fortunate not to be in that situation is we're focused on our students and we're getting them great outcomes. So, we haven't raised our tuition in 5 years. And we're growing both our traditional and our online students. So it is a real success story, and it's a real success story because your team is focused on the student, parent, but really the student.
And I'd say there's a lot of parallels between a successful business and a successful university. In the business world, you have a core competency, you have a set of products or services, and then you have to run a business. On the university side, the core competency is rock solid education, however you look
Right.
at it. Without that, nothing else matters. But with that, then as Ed said, you have to make the right investments. You have to make the right decisions to entice students to come here. And then you have to allow that product to go with them. Ed was talking about the graduation rate here.
Mm-hmm.
And that is because you created this environment from a business perspective that allows them to learn and then allows them to go and prosper.
Yeah, it's funny. Having been in this business for 40 years, there's so many people within that are uncomfortable with calling it a business. But as I say to them all the time, look, we're charging an amount of money, in some cases, some schools, a lot of money for this product, and the customer has choices of where they can go. They can go here, they can go to other institutions, whatever. That makes it a business. And then you have to deliver for the customer on what the customer's expectations are. I can't think of another way to define a business other than that. I also think that, and I'm really interested in both your perspectives on this, is as we know, as Ed mentioned, there are a lot of schools that are closing, one a week. We just recently had one in St. Louis announce they were closing, Fontbonne. As other schools close, many others, and obviously Maryville's in a very strong position vis-a-vis any of those, where do you see then higher ed in just a few, let's say 2030? We're talking about half the number of schools we have today being open, and are we talking about a same kind of thing where you've got state schools and football games and all that kind of good stuff, but you also have a sort of a broader sense of where education occurs? Just perspective, a lot of it having to do maybe with technology, things that Ed alluded to. Chris, why don't you start us off?
Sure, it's been interesting if you take a quick look back. You've got a lot of specialized universities who were proud about doing it the old-fashioned way. You had a lot of startup online universities, many of which have not made it.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have those universities, and I would say it's a minority, with that foundation of quality education, that have discovered and are aware that you have to have multiple ways of educating students in the future. It's not just a lecture anymore, right? It's got to be hands-on. It's not just the term butts and seats. It's got to be able to be online. So it's an amalgamation of those different ways of educating students, leveraging the right technologies, investing in the right technologies, bringing the right subject matter experts into the university. I think that will play out over the next 10, 20, 30 years.
So it's both the content, it's the delivery system, right? It's the channels on which the content and the information is put forward. And then what we talked about earlier, getting students to be actively engaged in their learning and not passive.
Yeah, I would think Maryville, just from a numbers perspective, we'll end up between 35 and 4,000 traditional students on this campus, and they'll have a great experience. And I think we'll quickly get to 25,000 online students, and they'll equally have a great outcome. Now, some of their makeup's different. A lot of times they're older, and it's graduate degrees and things of that nature. But our online offering is not a Zoom lecture. It is a very interactive way of learning, a very successful, very metric-driven way of learning.
It is very robust, very engaged, and we've got the internal and external measures to show that, including in programs as rigorous as nursing and others. You know, it's interesting, talk a little bit about the impact of the pandemic. Prior to the pandemic, and sometimes it's hard to remember pre-pandemic as opposed to now, you know, there was a lot of skepticism about online education, and now with the immediacy and the necessity of online learning at a host of levels in the pandemic, and some schools did it great, like ourselves, others not so great. But the question of whether you can learn online seems to have been put to rest. Now the real question is, how do you structure that online engagement and experience and the availability of it?
And I think the window's closed for a lot of schools. You know, we recently made $10 million investment this last year to enhance our both traditional and online investments. A lot of smaller schools just couldn't do that now, and we'll continue to make significant investments. And you can't make those investments unless you're getting good outcomes for your students. And so it's a circle that goes round and round.
Yeah, I'll give you a personal perspective. So my middle daughter was got her nursing degree, was a nurse at BJC, and she wanted more. And so she looked at Maryville, and she looked at WashU, she looked at St. Louis University, and she decided to go with Maryville because of its flexibility for graduate students, for her to get her nurse practitioner degree, mainly online, but then there are certain things you have to do on the campus. You have to do your clinicals. And that flexibility and price point that Maryville offered allowed her to get her degree over several years. And I know that she learned a lot, because whenever we have an issue with health now, we go to her. And she knows it. It's been amazing to watch.
Well, I talk to people about this, as you gentlemen know, all the time in the community, and it's interesting how people perceive things. People think of college students as 18 to 22-year-olds. 58% now of all the students studying to get a college degree are over the age of 25, and the majority of them are doing it online, not on ground. It's not a question of either or, like one is better than the other. It's just a question of, as Chris alluded to and Ed, this opening up of all these different ways of accessing education. My niece, I'll just be very personal about it. She went to college at 18, was not mature enough to handle it, flunked out. Went to another school at 19 or 20, flunked out of there, then went to work. And decided at the age of 27 that she was ready to go back and get a degree, but obviously had a job and really couldn't work through. So she ended up doing the online accounting degree at Maryville University and graduated 2 years ago. Very proud day for myself, obviously, and for her. But what it was illustrating was, here's somebody who was not ready for college from a maturity standpoint, not necessarily intellectually. And then when she was ready, the opportunity and the access was available to her, and now she's working in an insurance company and back in her home and doing great, and got a couple of promotions, and on it goes. Whereas in the past, that student or that student who didn't make it to begin with may have been stuck in the particular job she was in, and I don't want to say what it was, but it was not a job that carried with it a lot of forward opportunities.
And she would have been stuck with most universities even today to have an opportunity to get unstuck.
Yeah, that's right.
And we embrace those students, and the vast majority of them do tremendous.
Yeah. Well, the number now is about 50 million people in the United States with some college credit but no degree, who are doing a whole variety of jobs, and I'm sure doing great work and contributing to society, but also without the opportunities to do some other things that they need an education in order to do.
Mark, you've told me, I've just forgotten, we have a pretty high percentage of students who are the first in their family to go to college.
Oh, yeah. We have probably, I think the latest numbers, because it's self-reported, so sometimes students won't, but it's about 38% are first gen. In fact, this was the second year at graduation. The students come across the stage and they wear sashes where it advertises that they played volleyball or they were in the honors program or whatever. And we saw a ton of them that had a sash that said first gen. And they're obviously very proud of that. I'm a first gen college graduate. I'm thinking back to my father and mother, really how important that was to them, that we had that chance.
For a student, there's a lot of learning there that no one at home can help you with, because no one ever had that experience before.
That's right. And for so many, I don't want to embarrass you, but the three of us are all from the same age group, the latter part of the boomer generation. And I know that our parents and grandparents, largely working class people from different parts of the country, who never would have even conceived of being able to study and get an education to be a lawyer or a doctor, any of those things. It just wasn't even on the radar. For them, it was probably get a good solid job, maybe join a union to get better benefits, but that was basically the extent of their dreams. But for their kids, they dreamed much more. If there was is there a rewarding moment about being a trustee that jumps out, and just one, and it could be something small, it could be watching Eddie get a degree, or your daughters, it could be anything, but is there a moment that you're, this really was worth it?
Graduation for me.
Yeah.
When I go to graduation, it's such a diverse group, and they're so alive and excited, and so many different talents in different places. I think 47 countries this year our kids came from. That's when it's always rewarding to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, he stole my answer because it is so, it's rewarding. But at the same time, as a trustee, you'll also get to hear about the welcome engagement that your team does for students coming into Maryville for the very first time. How they reach out to them, how they reach out to their parents, how they are taking them step by step by step to embrace the Maryville environment. We never had that. All we had was, here's your dorm room. And I think that really is a great indication of the steps that they will go through ending up as a graduate of Maryville University.
And there's one other thing. Each board not each board, but most of them, you have a demonstration for us with something going on campus. And one of the more recent ones was in your group, where we was, and I don't remember the name of it, but it was the gaming online internships on campus.
Right. That
students could create their own games, and a young student was showing us the game he had created that was an amusement park themed game. And I just went home thinking, wow, that's just an unbelievable experience for a young person.
Yeah, what Ed's referring to is Matt Rathio, who's a faculty member on our campus. He owns his own game design business, and he came to us about 3 years ago and said, hey, I'd like to open up a branch of my business on campus and have students be interns and doing games, producing and creating. And we said, sure, that'd be great. So it's a studio. They're in there, and one of the kids or students that Ed mentioned had created a game and sold it to one of the gaming companies.
Atari, I think.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, and at any given time, for those of you that don't know, we have about 1,100 of our students engaged in clinical internship, active learning experiences, whether it's game producing, physical therapy, clinicals, nursing, working at Edward Jones in the finance area, any number of those opportunities that give them real hands-on experience. And we all know this. I mean, when you get young people and give them that hands-on experience, it lights a fire, and they want to do more of it. So if there's advice you would give to someone, maybe someone who would be thinking about being a trustee, whether it's at Maryville or, heck, even at the University of Kansas, perhaps, or Iowa State Cyclones. These are the two schools that Chris and Ed went to. What advice would you give them about being a trustee?
I would say you have this option of so many opportunities with our experience, and you want to go somewhere where not only do you have passion, which is an overused term, but you can contribute in some way. You don't want to just come and sit and be a talking head or an empty seat. You want to be able to give from your experience and partner with the other trustees to take the lead from the president and his team or her team, and then go in that direction and be an active part of making, in this case, Maryville University a huge success.
Yeah, yes, I wouldn't get involved in a board for social reasons, for status reasons. And there are a lot of boards that do that. And none of our board members are that way. They have a passion about Maryville, and they're involved in the committees, and they're involved with your team, and they bring a lot. And they're generous to us as a school. And so if you want to get involved as a trustee, you need, in my opinion, you need to find something that you can roll up your sleeves and get involved in.
Well said. Well, I want to thank Ed Ryan, Chair of the Board of Maryville University, and Chris Chadwick, Vice Chair of the Board here at Maryville, for taking the time and giving of your time. I think sometimes it's a board perspective is something that not everyone gets a chance to hear about and understand and see from your all experiences. So it's been great. That's another episode of Disruptor in Chief. We'll look forward to our next lineup, and I'll give you a teaser. It may involve esports, as we've won 2 national championships so far this year, and we're on our way, hopefully, to winning 2 more. If that's the case, then I've got to get Dan Clerk in here, and we've got to have a conversation about all that success. But thank you, everybody, for watching, and take care.
Thank you for joining us for Disruptor in Chief. Please share this episode with people in your network who might benefit from it. We'll see you next time.